Super excited to be speaking to everyone. Thank you all for joining, and I hope that this is going to be a great session. So we're going to spend around 25 minutes or so talking about IAM and threat and risk inside the access and permissions fabric inside really any of the public cloud providers. Um, Again, my name is Jeff Moncrief. I've been in InfoSec for a very long time now, going on about 25 years, dating back to the original Internet Security Systems, or ISS, as some of you folks may remember from back in the day. So I spent a long time in on-prem InfoSec. And then around 7 years ago, when I was at Cisco, I switched over to just focusing on securing public cloud workloads. I started on infrastructure as a service, really focusing on VPC flow logs across AWS and GCP, and then NSG flow logs in Azure, doing flow analytics, those kinds of things, looking for behavioral anomalies as it relates to APTs, insider threats, and those kinds of things. And about 4 years ago, I came over here to Sunry Security. And at Sunry, I was quickly humbled at what I did not understand about securing things in the public cloud. And that's what I hope that you can all kind of take away from this session today, is some of the things that I did not know back then that it's taken me 4 years to learn here, as it relates to what you need to be thinking about with securing identity with IAM in the public cloud, how IAM can be used nefariously against you, and how you can do some things today, real things today, to help reduce that risk footprint across the access fabric. And that's one thing I've definitely learned here over the years, that there is a strategy. And if you don't have a strategy going into securing IAM, then you're in big trouble, because you're going to be playing whack-a-mole, and you're not going to really make a lot of progress. So let's jump into it. I'm going to go over a few slides, and I'm going to show you a bit of a demo of a new technology that we're excited about over here at Sunry. And then we're going to talk about how you can implement a strategy today. We're going to talk about the fact that there's an identity crisis. There's no other way to put it. That's one thing I've learned over years and years now of plugging into customer environments, lighting them up, and exposing all of the skeletons in the closet as it relates to what's really out there, living and breathing across the identity fabric. And it's frightening. It really is frightening. And it's something that we can no longer have. It's a nice to have. We can't ignore it. We have to make securing IAM the fundamental dead center of our public cloud security strategy, if you ask me, based on the things that I'm seeing out there today. We're going to talk about the fact that not all permissions are created equal. Some can do some real harm to your cloud, whereas others are not so dangerous, and a little bit more benign. And that also needs to be, that needs to help shape your strategy. We'll go over a couple of live examples, as I was talking about, and then we'll talk about how you can implement a strategy. And then we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. Okay, so this slide right here, I'm not going to talk to all these numbers, okay? This represents a typical client scenario that I see, right? And that's another thing, is I'm talking to you today as an advisor, not as someone who's trying to sell you on anything, right? I don't care if you use Sunry's tooling or anyone else's tooling or name a third party, you've got to be thinking about this, all right? And the bottom line is that there's so much cyber litter and cyber garbage out there when I plug into a customer's environment, light it up, and they're always overwhelmed at what we find as it relates to A, how many identities are out there, and then B, how overprivileged and over entitled those identities are. And the other scary thing is that the vast majority of those identities, anywhere from 60 to 75%, are not used whatsoever. That's the cyber litter and cyber garbage that I'm referring to, whether that's roles or service principals or actual IAM users. Those are entities out there that have grants and entitlements and permissions to go do things, and they're not being used. But when we talk to folks about deleting them, getting rid of them, there's this level of fear and paralyzation that just overwhelms them. And to be honest with you, I would have that fear if I were them, or if I were you, of, hey, I don't know if I can delete this role or this service principal or this managed identity or this user that hasn't been used in 6 months, because I don't know if it's needed 6 days from now, or maybe it's needed a year and a half from now, because we only use that identity every now and then for something very non-routine, but mission critical to the company. And then you've got the fact that, yes, there are constantly new identities being created from the development and the application teams in the business. And then on the security side where we're constantly trying to figure out why is that identity there? It could take weeks, sometimes months to go research whether or not you can safely delete something. And the takeaway really is that this becomes a battle that you almost can't win at scale. And it's an identity crisis. So because of that, we have to start shifting our mindset. We have to start thinking about getting rid of what we call the unused permissions attack surface that, yes, an insider threat could potentially occur at. As we know, if you think about all the GitHub repos that are just, I mean, day in and day out, I post about this on LinkedIn. There's GitHub repos that just track this alone. There's constantly every week new sets of credentials being exposed. As a result, I've said this for years, folks don't craft these bespoke exploits to vulnerabilities, to 0 days. They don't do that anymore. They just log in. Why would you have to when you can just go get a credential and log straight into the dead center of your cloud, right? So it doesn't matter if it's an insider or someone that's coming in and assuming things. You have to worry about it equally same, because now you have so many different opportunities for someone to get inside your cloud versus the on-prem traditional days, okay? Now, this gets us into really paring down this risk landscape into permissions that can do things that are harmful to your cloud. Okay. There are over 40,000 permissions across Google, Azure, and AWS as of today. And this number is growing constantly. All right. And of those 40,000, we have a full-time research team, our content team here at Sunry. We have done extensive research and determined that there's only around 2,500 across the 3 cloud service providers that can actually do real harm and damage to the organization. And we're talking about permissions that map to the MITRE tactics: evasion, persistence, reconnaissance, exfiltration, your typical kill chain type phases, if you will. The rest of those permissions are fairly benign. Certainly things that you don't need to be worrying about in non-sensitive, non-prod type environments. We're talking about things that are sensitive as it relates to creating an internet gateway, creating a NAT gateway, exposing a blob or a storage container straight to the internet. There's some really, really interesting things that you can do from an adversarial standpoint as it relates to just a few permissions that honestly, they shouldn't be granted to all these different identities all the time. They're only permissions that are needed to be used every now and then. Oftentimes only when you're creating a new cloud or a new project, and they don't have to be really revisited again. And that's what we need to focus on. We need to focus on a strategy that really focuses on permissions that can do real harm to your environment. Now, having said that, I understand that you're going to want to try to get to true least privilege in sensitive environments that are compliant, et cetera. That's fine. Go for it. In those certain specific environments, go for least privilege, pare it down, use a tool that focuses on that, like Sunry or any of the others, to really understand used versus unused permissions. But at scale, when we're talking about 40 or 50,000 identities across dozens and sometimes hundreds of accounts, we have customers at Sunry that have thousands of accounts. You can't win. It's unattainable. You have to focus on what really, really matters as far as what can do the most damage to the business and getting rid of that risk landscape. So we'll take an example here. SageMaker. That is an amazing analytics tool that is out in AWS. And it does data analytics and just does amazing things. It has all kinds of features and services, but it also gives you the ability, there's a permission in SageMaker that is super dangerous. That permission allows you to expose that data set straight out to the internet with a pre-signed URL. What does that mean? It's a pre-authenticated URL, right? You shouldn't be able to do that, right? That is a dangerous, dangerous permission. I've got another one for you. What about disabling CloudTrail or disabling logging in GCP or Azure? You can do that. And as an adversary, you better believe I'm going to want to hide my tracks if I'm doing reconnaissance, privileged escalation, jumping from one role to another, and then grabbing data, or maybe I'm ransoming that data with a key or something like that. I want to hide my tracks. So it's not just the ability to expose things, it's the ability to turn things off as well. That's super, super dangerous. And that is just a typical example of how what we at Sunry call a sensitive permission is something that can be used dangerously to put the company at risk. So, hypothetical here. What if you didn't have to worry about those sensitive permissions, right? What if you didn't have to worry about services that weren't being used? And that's really where we have to start building our strategy. And this is where the unused permissions attack surface comes into play. I'm going to give you a true stat. Here at Sunry, we're cloud native, built from the ground up in AWS. We've been around for about 6 years now. We use 21 services in AWS. Now, there's almost 330 services in AWS. Do you realize what a massive unused surface that is that's ripe for the picking? And I want you to think about that, right? I want you to think about in your cloud, in what you're responsible for securing, or if you're building a cloud in the future, when you create that account, when you create those accounts in Azure or GCP or AWS, you have access to all those services, hundreds, it's almost 1,000 across all the 3 CSPs. That is a massive, massive unused surface that is available for folks to start deploying things into, for folks to start testing. Now, not only creating ingress, egress points and things like that, but you have to think about cost and billing as well. That's a huge factor. I just recently learned about denial of wallet attacks. That's something that we have to think about. And the ability to just remove that entire unused surface across all those different services, as well as sensitive permissions, just disable access to them. It's amazing what can happen to the risk landscape when you just take those conversations completely off the table. And so that's where we're going to get into a live demonstration now. And I'm going to walk you through what this looks like, a way that this is shameless plug here. This is going to be a Sunry demo. It's going to be very quick, just a few minutes, and then we're going to get back into how we can build a strategy. But I think that this goes back to what I didn't understand and know about 4 years ago when I came over here. And that is that, back then, and people still say it now, identity is the new perimeter. Okay. I don't disagree with you, but I actually say that we should change that. Identity is the new network. In a cloud native world, this is what I did not understand. Back when I was focused so much on infrastructure as a service, would just lift and shift workloads up into the cloud for big enterprises that I was working with back then. But in a cloud native world, everything lives, breathes, functions, and communicates, not through the network, through the access fabric instead. Everything functions through the access fabric. Services, resources, identity. A complete cloud native application could be fully functioning using 8 or 9 services or microservices and have no network footprint whatsoever. And I think that's what amazed me so much and blew me away, because that is a massive risk landscape that is ripe for the picking. I use this term to make folks understand what they have to think about, and that's flat. Back with securing on-premise environments, we had to segment, we had to firewall, we had to make sure that everything was zoned off. More often than not, I plug into customer environments now and everything's flat. Everything can talk to everything, and that's frightening. But on top of that, there's so much that's out there that's unused. Okay, so now that I've said that, teed it up, we're going to jump into the demo here. And so this is what Sunry calls the Cloud Permissions Firewall. It is the first identity-based permissions firewall in the world. We just announced this several weeks ago. We're super excited about it. And what this does is it flips that first slide that I showed you with all those insane numbers. It flips that entire model on its head. It says there's no way you're ever going to be able to implement 30,000 least privilege policies on those 30,000 identities. And guess what? It's all going to change tomorrow, even if somehow you're able to do it, which will probably take you a year or two to do anyways. We've learned over the years that customers need help. You all need help. It's not easy to give you the visibility that these tools in this identity space give folks as it relates to illuminating least privilege, illuminating excessive entitlements, illuminating unused things. What's really, really hard, again, is that parallelization when folks are scared to death to delete something, whether that's a permission or an identity itself. And then even the fact that it could take weeks again to go research whether or not they can safely delete something, that is, it becomes such a challenge that a lot of times folks just say, I can't tackle this right now. It's unattainable. So we invented a technology. We took a step back around 10 years ago and said, you know what, there's a way that we can do this, and we can help folks remove vast swaths of this risk footprint quickly and safely. And it's through orchestrating firewall controls over the permissions fabric. And if you think about or accepts and denies in a firewall, traditional firewall, if you will, like an NGFW or something like that, we're doing the same thing here, except the permits and denies are not across the network, they're across the permissions fabric. It's so clever. And we're so excited about it. Well, the first thing you do, there's a strategy here. And again, you don't have to use the cloud permissions firewall. Write this down, right? There's ways that you can go do this by hand, but I promise you, you're going to get overwhelmed and you're going to have problems with it scaling out very, very quickly. But disable unused regions. That's the one thing that we've learned is so huge. Like, I can go deploy things right now in any of the cloud providers in Europe, in South America, in Asia, and no one's going to know about it. It's so hard to understand unless you're monitoring that bill or something like that, like a microscope. And even then, sometimes it's too late. It's so hard to know whether or not someone can get access to a credential, right? All of a sudden they're an insider and they can go start deploying things in another data center that you have no visibility into, or another region or location. And that's where you get into trouble with denial of wallet attacks. You get in trouble with cross-geo data transfers, and all of a sudden you're out of compliant. That's a huge headache, an area of risk that wouldn't it be nice if we just removed it off the table, right? So with a click of a button in this firewall here, you can disable access to unused regions, either across your entire cloud or its scope. All right. The next thing that we then do is we walk you through, okay, let's disable unused services. This is where that comes into play, where I was telling you that Sunry only uses around 20, right? I don't want someone going into SageMaker and deploying things and exposing them with a pre-signed URL. I don't want folks going into Lightsail and deploying VPSs. I don't want folks going into Cosmos DB and deploying resources, or Databricks in Azure. I don't need it. I don't use it. It creates risk to the company. Just turn it off. Just turn it off. And this firewall has the ability to do that for you, to do it either across your entire cloud or at scale. And you start to see what happens with the permissions attack surface shrinking. It's fascinating. By just turning off the unused parts of your cloud, then you can focus on what I hold near and dear to my heart here from all the years that I've been focusing on this, and that's those unused identities and those unused permissions on those identities. This is my favorite part of this capability, and that is quarantining zombies. You think about it, there's so much cyber litter and garbage out there, as I said earlier, that is unused, but folks have no idea what it's for, who deployed it, how it got there, if it's needed. It's just litter that's out there, and we don't know if we can delete it, right? So there's this fear, this paralyzation that hits folks. So we said, you know what, we understand that. We're going to give folks the ability to actually quarantine all those identities, so we don't have to delete anything. Not a permission, not an identity. We just put a layer of encapsulation, if you will, around it that says it's sandboxed, it's quarantined. It can't use those permissions, but if it does, if it wakes up, we're going to be ready for it. This solution has a cool permissions on demand capability, so that if a zombie does reanimate, as we call it, it would trigger a permissions request over to an approver, either in the system here or Slack, Teams. We have all those capabilities built in so that actually your developers can actually interact with the firewall, and you don't have to worry about it. They can actually be in charge of securing their environments, which is fantastic. But what if one of these zombies wakes up and it's not supposed to? There's that insider threat component. Again, folks, they just log in. There's credentials exposed every day, every week in GitHub or some other source, file bucket, whatever. It's still happening. It's elementary as it is, it's still happening. And they're just going to log in. So if a zombie tries to wake up, it's not going to get that permission because it's going to actually trigger an approval. But it's going to be an amazing indicator of compromise for you. Think of it as a giant security blanket end to end across your entire cloud, letting you know if these identities are used, and if they are used nefariously, you're going to get an alert to it. So incredible, incredible capability there from a tripwire perspective. Those of you that have listened to me before, you know I love talking tripwires. You know I love second lines of defense as we develop a strategy to securing things in the cloud. A great, great capability there where we remove the fear of deleting something. And if it wakes up, that's great. And it's supposed to, we can approve it. That application can suddenly function. We broke nothing. But again, if it wakes up and it's not supposed to, you just got a nice alert. And then the last thing that we do is we protect services and we remove those sensitive permissions. Okay. So we remove those sensitive permissions, and it gives you the ability to lock down things like EC2 and or maybe it's S3 or any of the other cloud service provider services, and only those identities that should have access to those sensitive permissions do. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. I'll click through and we'll open up EC2. This is what sensitive permissions look like, right? In EC2, authorizing ingress, egress security groups, creating internet gateways, creating NAT gateways, those kinds of things, right? Things that can really, really do some harm to the business because they just created a brand new ingress, egress point. Not good. Something we shouldn't be doing every day. And you might have 100 identities in this particular account, but guess what? Only 3 of those identities need access to those sensitive permissions. The other 97 don't. So just protect that service. Remove that risk altogether. And if one of those identities does try to use one of those permissions, guess what? We'll trigger a permissions request. You can approve it either here or one of those chat systems. You keep on going. We broke nothing. You can do it temporarily or perpetually. So a lot of cool capabilities there. But I think that the takeaway is that tackling this with just visibility tools, whether we're talking native, cloud native, or third party, we've learned, and all of our customers have learned over the years, it's an amazing capability to have visibility. But when it comes to actually fixing the risk, that's where the story starts to crumble. And that's why we invented this technology. And we have some folks that are using it now, even though it's brand new, that are super delighted by it. End of the cloud permissions firewall part there. And I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to go back into slide deck here, right? I've gone over how current tooling versus Sunry is significantly different. It truly is. It takes something that could take 10 months or 2 years, and it turns it into something that you can do in a matter of 5 days or less, really. It takes 1 day to get visibility. Within day 2 or day 3, you could be disabling and blocking and quarantining things to significantly remove risk, not only to protect the business, but to make yourself the hero, right? You take care of those unused services, disable unused regions, quarantine zombies, and restrict unused sensitive permissions. Another way to look at this from a non-product standpoint, just from a consultative standpoint, is go disable the unused services, go disable the unused regions. The cloud providers don't make it super easy to go do that. It's a lot of work, but you got to have that in your strategy. Be thinking about the unused permissions attack surface, folks, because that's what's going to get used against you. You remove all the unused users or quarantine them, right? You remove those unused services and unused regions. Why? Because then you can change your strategy confidently, safely, to focusing on the running cloud. Okay. And that's where you're going to get into things where you can focus on lateral movement chains, privileged escalation scenarios, toxic combinations, separation of duties violations, but at least it's on the running cloud. It is amazing what we've seen here at Sunry when we disable these things, and to watch what happens to those attack chains that you see in all this tooling, all these lateral movement attack paths. What you don't see in those tools is that the majority of that stuff is unused. And when you turn this stuff off and you quarantine those identities, those attack paths vanish, right? And what's left, that's your running cloud. That's actually, things are living and breathing. And then you can really double down on least privilege and breaking possible lateral movement chains by re-architecting and those kinds of things, right? I talked a little bit about, you need the ability to exempt identities. That permissions on demand is a great capability, but I'm going to stop right there. I know I started a little bit early, so I'm going to end a little bit early, and I'm going to turn over the moderators and ask if there's any Q&A. But again, I hope that you all took a couple of nuggets from this on building a strategy, thinking about identity as not just the new perimeter, but as the new network. And there are some real things that you need to be focusing on to take big chunks of this risk landscape out of the picture versus playing whack-a-mole with just trying to get least privilege on a bunch of different identities with no real approach to, focusing on things. And again, you need to have that focus on the unused permissions attack surface first.
Beautiful, Jeff. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Questions, everybody. Put them into either Slack or Zoom. Fantastic talk, and so much cool stuff that I picked up on, like cyber litter or cyber garbage.
I've been saying that for years. Yeah.
Absolutely love it.
And Chris, that's what it is. It's just trash and artifacts from years past and projects past and teams past that now we have to come in and figure out, why is this here?
Yeah.
Right.
And the fact that you nail it down to what you call attack surface, because that's what it is important. Limiting attack surface, really, really an important topic, which is kind of like one of those fundamental things, what IT should have done since the get-go. We should have done principles of least privileges. We should have made sure we have segmentation, meaning you're not exposing every single platform as a service deployment, and so on and so on and so on. Every single privilege should not be exposed by default. Right. So to me, Jeff, while we're seeing if there's any questions, this seemed like a great way to start governing and start to environments. But is there any ways for me to get any say overviews over the existing privileges sets that are in my cloud? Like maybe some graphical overview. See, over there is Steve and Bob, they have, say, a dangerous privilege associated to me, to them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And so that gets us into tooling. Okay. And there's two types of tooling. There's cloud native tooling and then third-party tooling. Cloud native tooling, in Azure, it's going to be Entra ID, and they have their own capability. AWS has their IAM access analyzer. And then GCP kind of has more of a direct built-in, least privileged indicator, we'll call it. And then you get into third-party tooling, which is really designed for this. There's this whole market that I've been living in for the last couple of years called Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. It's another acronym. I know, CIEM, but that Gartner created that kind of space after we had been around a couple of years over here focusing on this at Sunry, because they recognize that you can no longer, that there needs to be a dedicated space focusing on identity security in the public cloud, right? So the reason I say that is because there's two different kind of sets of tooling, but I would say that you have to use one of them. The cloud native tooling is going to start to fall short very, very quickly, right? It always called cloud native tooling kind of a stopgap, right? Unless you really want to double down on something. And this is an area that I think you want to double down. I really do. And that tooling, like Sunray, is going to give you visibility into all of those users, all of those roles, all those service principals in a single pane of glass and a nice dashboard. And it's going to let you know, hey, you want a list of every user that's got admin rights? Here you go. And every user that's got IAM pass role, here you go, right? But the best part is we're going to tell you that none of those permissions are being used. We're going to tell you that it is overprivileged. And that if it was used, then we're going to be able to show you who did it. And here's the best part. We can also tell you what that can access. So you have to be thinking about context, right? Mm-hmm. An identity is just an identity, but what if it's a dead end? You need to understand, I got 100 things that I got to worry about, but these are the only two that can actually do damage to my cloud because they have access to another role through a trust relationship that has access to sensitive data. And through two commands at the command line right now, I could go from role to role, identity to identity, grab that data and be gone in around 2 minutes. Those are the two that you need to go worry about because that's how you can have a really bad day. So I think it involves, you got to have tooling that is purpose-built and can give you context. It's such an overused term, but to the blast radius, right? What does this really mean? I get it's not used and it's there, but can it actually do anything?
Yeah. No, love your insights there, Jeff. That's beautiful, and you're hitting on some of my buttons because my company, we're only 4 years old and we're cloud only, right? somebody gets access to my cloud environment, it could be the end of the company. So we obviously have to have a lot of barriers to make sure that we don't get that end life type of scenario where the blast radius is too big if we should have a compromise, which we must expect, of course.
Yeah.
I do see a question coming in on the Zoom Q&A right now, and we do have some more, we might have some more minutes for more questions, but Matt Shelton has a question. Is there a time limit on the permission requests?
Is there a time limit on the, I guess we're talking about the cloud permissions firewall.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a 24-hour time limit on those requests where we can approve or deny, and then it'll just kind of go away. And then you can request again. And just like if if a zombie wakes up or someone tries to use a sensitive permission and that permissions request comes in and you approve it, what it does is it creates an exemption in the firewall, just like you would exempt things in a firewall and a traditional firewall. And then you can remove that exemption, it'll take it away, and then they need to use it again, it'll trigger a new permissions on demand request. But yeah, there is a time limit on how long that request lasts. And then when you do approve it, like I said, you can approve it temporarily. So for like 4 or 6 hours, almost like a just-in-time request, if you're familiar with JIT,
Sure.
as we call it in the business. Or you can make it perpetual. So a permanent exemption.
Nice one. Yeah, thanks for asking me that. And I can see several use cases for my own type of businesses that I run where this would be, it would make life a bit easier, I think, from my point of view.
Yeah,
Speaking of
the
firewalls,
quote
by
that
the
we
way,
get from customers is that I've never seen anything like this. I hear this every day. It's so cool to be able to actually help folks in this area for the first time ever, really, from a fixing, from an action standpoint. But folks, it's kind of that's what folks say is, I've never seen anything like this. It's quite exciting.
And hopefully, I'm going to sign up for the trial myself, but hopefully the platform is easy for our developers and operations to use, so they feel like it acts seamlessly. Like, I don't want any shadow cloud vendors pop up because, oh no, I can't do my stuff. You know, it needs to be of course, user friendly and also govern the problem properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's the beauty of this permissions on demand technology. I get asked this a lot, do my teams, whether it's the cybersecurity or the cloud security or the operations and app teams, do they have to learn how to use this? Nope. They don't even have to know it's there. All that they know is there's this really great orchestration mechanism out there that's routing approvals and denials to them, and they're in charge of their own security. It's fabulous. And then we, as InfoSec practitioners, we can just monitor and watch it all from a governance standpoint. So it is cool because it's almost like this great orchestrator that's it's in the shadows.
So would you say, Jeff, that this is a feature of, was this AWS only, or was this something that you were supporting multiple cloud vendors for?
Yeah, so it supports all 3 cloud provider vendors. The demo that I showed you is AWS only because we actually just released AWS support a few weeks ago. And we're rolling out support for GCP and Azure over the coming months. So we've got customers that are already signing up for the beta versions of that. They're so excited. So as of summer, it'll be fully GA with all 3 clouds.
Beautiful. And one of the things I see we just got in a question from Jeffrey as well. We'll get to your questions here in a second. One of the things that I've been having like panic attacks about is not having visibility in who is seizing or taking privileges in my cloud. I want to be able to like follow up on what kind of privileges are in use in my application. And that's something that you would help solve for me, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As it relates to your application and who's using what, I always like to flip things upside down for customers, Chris. So I say that almost all the tools in this space, they focus on the identities, and they show you this identity has these permissions and they're used or unused. I get it. That's great. But what if you start to tell the story from the inside out and focus on the data itself? So maybe it is that critical application that you're talking about. Maybe it is a sensitive data store, structured or unstructured. What if I could tell you that 64 identities have access to that right now? Of those 64, 50 are non-person, and they're across 8 different subscriptions, 10 projects, or 10 different accounts. I guarantee you that is a level of visibility that you were never able to tell the business. You were never
Yeah,
able to tell them that. And that's something that is unique about our capabilities from an end-to-end perspective, is that we are able to think about it as reverse engineering the maze. We reverse engineer the maze from the inside out. We already know all the answers. We already know the
yeah,
paths to what matters the most to the business. And then guess what? The majority of that stuff that had access, it's not being used. It's not
yeah,
actually
yeah.
using the permissions that were granted to it. And we can show you all you that in a single dashboard. It's cool when you can figure out every possible way that someone can do something bad to you up front and then just remove it.
Yeah, I really like it. And also doing it upside text, because I know what assets matter to me, and then looking at the privileges associated with is a good approach. If you can be very quick, like 30 seconds, Jeff, and Alexis, you need to prepare and be ready for your presentation. Jeffrey has a question: multi-tiered environments. Any challenges, difficulties in implementing in multi-tiered environments?
Oh, not at all. No issues whatsoever in multi-tenant environments. You can have multiple tenants, multiple organizations, multiple clouds, all in the exact same single instance of the cloud permissions firewall. Or if you wanted to have, each customer have their own instance, you could totally do that as well. It's designed out of the box for that.